I will now hand over to Dr. Sajid and Javed, Research Fellow SDPI, to moderate this session.
Thank you, Abdullah. It's indeed a great pleasure, to moderate a session with such distinguished guests around joining us online from different fields. Thank you. So let me start by thanking each of our distinguished guests, panelists, and the audience on behalf of International Trade Center, UK Aid, and SDPI. We welcome you. A very good afternoon to all of you. Indeed, a very timely and much needed debate in Pakistan, particularly on export competitiveness amid COVID-19. I'm sure our panelists will be bringing three key point of discussions that are much relevant to Pakistan related to the topic. One is the export competitiveness. Who does not know in Pakistan that we are already picking up on the current account deficits, and the sustainability of growth largely depends on how well we perform in export sector, and this is where export competitiveness will be a very key element to sustain the growth trajectory that Pakistan is picking up. So it's really important issue, and good to see that it is coming at a very timely when there is a debate going on this one. The second issue that I think is very important in today's debate is the SMEs. Where is that export competitiveness coming from? Who is gaining from those improved export competitiveness? Because this will be very central to a resilient and a fair recovery from COVID-19. So I think this is a very timely and much needed discussion that our panelists are going to pick up. So without further ado, let me invite the man actually taking all this as the coordinator of the Revenue Mobilization Investment and Trade ReMIT project for his opening remarks, Dr. Syed Tauqir Hussain Shah. He is National Project Coordinator, International Trade Center. Over to you, sir, for your opening remarks.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are, please.
Yeah, thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. Let me welcome our colleagues Edwin Gaarder and Dr. Syed from the ITC headquarters, who have taken time out and joined us. And thank you, Edwin and Dr. Syed, for this early morning meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to be part of this webinar on export competitiveness amid COVID-19. I thank the organizers for providing me an opportunity to participate in this very important discourse. COVID-19 proved to be a huge shock to the economy globally, and it has become an existential threat to the SMEs in the present times, particularly in the transition economies in the developing world. On behalf of International Trade Center, I welcome you all to this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, International Trade Center is the only development agency that is fully dedicated to supporting internationalization of small and medium-sized enterprises. ITC enables SMEs in developing and transition economies to become more competitive and connect to international markets for trade and investment, thus raising incomes, creating jobs, especially for women, young people, and poor communities. ITC was established in 1964 and is a joint agency of the World Trade Organization and United Nations. ITC's mission is to foster inclusive and sustainable economic development and contribute to the achievement of UN SDGs. ITC works towards creating trade impact for good. It is ITC's endeavor to strengthen the integration of the business sector of developing countries and economies in transition into the global economy, and to improve the performance of trade and investment support institutions like TDAP and Board of Investment in Pakistan for the benefit of SMEs. Our goal is to improve international competitiveness of SMEs. We in ITC believe that one of the most viable strategies to achieve national development goals in both developing and developed nations is to promote small and medium enterprises, because SMEs increase competition, generate employment, and develop entrepreneurship. while boosting economic vitality at the community level and creating sustainable livelihoods. We firmly believe that SMEs can play an important role in generating innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, ReMIT, Revenue Mobilization and Investment Program, is a new initiative that ITC has launched in partnership with Ministry of Commerce. Through this program, we strive to enable SMEs in Pakistan to effectively engage in international markets. This is a UK FCDO funded initiative, and it plans to help enhance Pakistan's trade diversification, sharpen competitiveness, and integration into global value chains. The ITC will implement the ReMIT program, and this program will run from 2020 to 2024. And we look forward to think tanks like SDPI and similar organizations to be key partners in this endeavor. These efforts are part of a larger program of UK government, which again is called ReMIT, but it aims at contributing to sustainable and inclusive economic development in the country as a whole, and plans to work with Board of Investment and FPR also. ReMIT, the trade limb which we are responsible for, will focus on creating a conducive environment for small and medium enterprises to engage in trade. It will help diversify the economy and capture additional export opportunities for country post-COVID-19. ITC is committed to strengthening Pakistan's approach to trade and stimulating international trade competitiveness. This will make it easier for Pakistani businesses to trade internationally and support job creation in export-oriented sectors. The project is a comprehensive and far-reaching initiative involving major public and private stakeholders in business and international trade in Pakistan. Through the project's interventions include national priority sector export strategy, building institutional capacity for trade policy formulation, and addressing trade barriers. And there is a targeted component, a sizable one, for trade facilitation oriented reforms, where the project plans to go a long way towards contributing to increased trade and investment for inclusive and sustainable economic development of Pakistan. ReMIT has a special focus on youth and women. It has a gender responsive framework which informs all project activities. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 pandemic represents an unprecedented disruption to the global economy and world trade, as production and consumption are scaled back across the globe. International trade and investment have always relied on the cross-border mobility of individuals, which was the greatest casualty of this pandemic. A significant amount of services trade requires physical proximity between producers and consumers. Mobility is important to the operation of services providers who establish commercial presence in other countries, as well as those who ordinarily provide services remotely across international borders. All modes of services trade have been hugely hit by COVID precautionary measures taken by all nations. Particularly hard hit are Mode 2 and Mode 4 of the services trade. We hope to learn more on this during today's webinar. Border measures and travel restrictions have had a particularly heavy impact on sectors such as tourism and education services. Ladies and gentlemen, three main sources of trade costs currently have the potential to make a significant impact on international trade amid the pandemic and impact competitiveness of countries, especially developing and LDCs. The most important are transport and travel costs. Trade policy is also an important determinant of trade costs. And finally, this high level of uncertainty accompanying the pandemic magnifies existing trade costs. Mobility barriers also significantly affect trade in goods through their impact on transport services and on information and transaction costs. Ladies and gentlemen, women, in our view, are at a risk of suffering more than men from the trade disruption generated by COVID-19. One of the reasons for this is that a larger share of women work in sectors and types of firms that have been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. Women make up a larger share of workforce in the manufacturing sectors such as textiles, apparel, footwear, telecommunication products that experience some of the largest falls in export growth during the pandemic. A large share of women than men work in services such as tourism and business travel services that have been directly affected by the regional and international travel restrictions brought about by the pandemic. Considerable proportion of firms are owned or managed by women are micro and small and medium enterprises. And lower levels of financial resources and limited access to public funds are placing the survival of such women-owned and women-managed businesses at greater risk. Ladies and gentlemen, the enforcement of social distancing, lockdowns, and other measures in response to COVID-19 pandemic has led consumers to ramp up online shopping, social media use, internet telephony, and teleconferencing, and streaming of videos and films. The implications of COVID-19 pandemic may last for a longer time, and e-commerce in goods and services will need to continue to adapt to this new normal or this new environment. The COVID-19 pandemic has made it clear that e-commerce can be an important tool or solution for consumers in times of crisis, and that it is also an economic driver, particularly for small businesses. However, the pandemic has highlighted not only the importance of the digital technology in general, but also several vulnerabilities across the world, especially the deepening digital divide. The network capacity and higher bandwidth services have proved to be crucial in these time of crisis, not only during the pandemic itself, but also for e-commerce and economic inclusion in general. The importance of networks effectiveness and higher broadband availability at affordable prices has become very important. Thus again highlighting the new challenges that SMEs in developing world are facing. The good news is that global merchandise trade is continuing its robust recovery from the shock of the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the WTO's Goods Trade Barometer, which hit a record high in its latest reading issued last month, and we hope to hear more on this from our colleagues joining in from Geneva today. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 has brought disruption to the globalized and interconnected world. Many experts are raising the question, will COVID finally kill globalization? Many people believe that the fact that even before pandemic, globalization was already on the retreat. COVID has only accelerated this trend. We have to accept that present day world is a diminished world. It is the world of globalization and not the globalization as we understood it. The global value chains, driven supply chains, which brought great hopes for the developing countries, are being rethought. The International Trade Center's flagship report, the SME Competitiveness Outlook 2021, which was launched recently, proposes a way forward for SMEs in the backdrop of COVID and climate change challenge. The SME Outlook report advocates that the drive to rebuild back better must incorporate environmental sustainability into business operations, investment choices, national policies, and international commitments, and place SMEs and particularly women-owned SMEs at its core. We look forward to learn more about the green recovery from pandemic that ITC is advocating from Edwin, our keynote speaker. Once again, thank you very much, and we look forward to an engaging discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tauqir Shah, for a very brief yet comprehensive introduction of the ReMIT project. And making some very important points while highlighting the challenges and the good news arising from the COVID-19. I think two very important points that I can take for particularly relevant to Pakistan are internationalization of SMEs. That is very, it's much needed and has been kind of ignored in the recent debate. More or less SMEs have been kind of looked into from a perspective of domestic economy. But this is good to see on discussion on internationalization of SMEs. And the second point that's arising from of the many other points very important that you have been raising in your opening remarks, the diversifying the economy to improve the international competitiveness, export competitiveness of Pakistan. These are two, and then finally the gender sensitive impact of COVID-19. To hear more on these and many other points, we are joined by a very distinguished guest, Mr. Edwin John Santana Gaarder from International Trade ITC Center. Edwin has delivered workshops on trade facilitation in Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa and has managed trade facilitation components of EU-funded projects, advancing Afghan trade and COMSA cross-border trade initiative. Currently, he is working on a very important issue, and that is particularly relevant to Pakistan and South Asia also at this point of time, and that is the informal cross-border trade, exploring the relationship between procedural obstacles to trade and broader deficiencies in the trading environment, informality, corruption, and harassment. Edwin has a BA in English Literature from the University of Oxford and an MA in International Development from Sciences Po Paris Institute. For a keynote address, over to you, Mr. Edwin. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much, Dr. Javed, for the welcome. Thank you, Dr. Shah, for your opening remarks. I'd like to say good morning to all the distinguished guests, the panelists, and I would like to thank you for the invitation to come and speak at this event. I would have liked, as usual, to have been with you in person, but I think this is a demonstration of some of the impacts that COVID-19 has had on our societies. We're no longer able to do this kind of event in person. So I think this is an important topic and a timely one that we are discussing this morning. And I thank you for the opportunity to say a few words today. So Dr. Syed, who is my senior at the International Trade Center, has asked me to speak to you today about this topic of trade competitiveness in the context of COVID-19. I have not been that much involved in the ReMIT project so far, although I hope that will change soon. But I think he has asked me to speak nevertheless because last year I was quite involved in helping the ITC to develop its strategy, its response strategy to COVID-19. And that response strategy is expressed in what we call a 15-point action plan on supporting small businesses through the COVID-19 crisis and into the future. And so I'd like to maybe take the opportunity to talk to you today a little bit about what's in that document, some of the recommendations that the ITC has made on the response to the COVID-19 strategy, the crisis. But before that, I just want to point out that we're in uncharted territories here, and we have been for a while. So when the COVID-19 crisis first hit last year, we were all a bit taken aback, taken by surprise. And even in Geneva, you had all the great minds of the international community trying to come together to find some answers to this very difficult problem and to this crisis that we were facing and which was really unprecedented. But you know, we worked hard on it, and I think maybe some of the things that we were able to come up with will be relevant, were relevant, and will continue to be relevant in terms of trade policy, SME competitiveness, export competitiveness in general. So let me summarize some of those for you. So to start with, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic was really was and is a massive crisis, both from a health perspective. I don't want to go into the number of lives lost. Sometimes it's too tragic to think about, but also from an economic perspective. So, you know, with the lockdowns and all the restrictions that were introduced, we had really a big economic hit. You know, at the time, we were talking about a 3% drop in global GDP. We were expecting a 30 to 40% drop in trade flow, in investment flows, international investment flows, and a significant drop in trade as well. And you know, now more than 1 year later, a lot of those forecasts have proven to be true. We've really been through a tough period. When it comes to trade, actually, I think the world was pleasantly surprised by how resilient international supply chains proved to be. So we faced fewer shortages than expected. And generally speaking, goods continued to flow across borders despite all of the additional precautions and additional challenges that trade players were facing. However, there was a hit. There was a hit to demand. So due to the lockdowns, you know, there was a significant drop in demand from consuming countries, and there was a hit to supply as well. You know, with factories closing down because of you know, sick workers or precautions taken to halt the spread of the virus, and what we found was that MSMEs, so micro, small, and medium enterprises, were the hardest hit, and they were the least prepared also to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. In general, SMEs around the world face trouble in access to finance, and you know, this crisis period was a period when we really needed a little bit of a spare cash lying around so that we could pull through, you know, a drop in revenues or additional costs associated with the pandemic. And also SMEs, international SMEs, had a narrower supply base. So in case of troubles in their supply chain, it's also more difficult for an SME to find alternatives. So SMEs were facing additional extra problems, but they're also a very important engine in our economies, and also an engine, significant players in our response to the crisis. So, you know, SMEs are active in the construction sector, and you know, at the time we had to build hospitals, additional emergency rooms to welcome the sick. They were very involved also in the manufacturing of some of the essential goods that we needed. You can think of the masks and the personal protective equipment, for example. And of course, SMEs are the biggest providers of jobs in the world. And so on the one hand, you know, you have SMEs facing particularly difficult problems, and on the other hand, they're very important players in our economies, but also in our response to the crisis. So that's kind of the diagnosis of the situation that we were facing last year, and in response, we tried to come up with some recommendations. So recommendations to our three different constituents. On the one hand, businesses themselves, SMEs themselves. but then also the institutions and the government organizations that exist to support those SMEs, which we call trade and investment support institutions. And then also recommendations to governments on how to deal with this crisis. And our recommendations were split into two categories. We had, of course, the crisis response, which was the immediate measures that needed to be taken to support SMEs. And I was happy to see in the agenda of the meeting that actually Pakistan, did mobilize a lot of emergency funding for its private sector and for SMEs, which was one of the recommendations that we made. But then we had the other set of recommendations, which were to do with the new normal. Dr. Shah, you mentioned this. COVID-19 is changing our societies and our economies for the long term, and I think the sooner we adapt and the sooner we prepare to deal with this new normal, the better. And so I wanted to focus just in this last part of my intervention on that second type of recommendation, which is adapting to the new normal. Because even though we're still in crisis mode, I think that things are gradually, people are gradually getting used to this new world that has been affected by COVID-19, and people are planning for the future. And I think we really need to be aware as business people and as policymakers what might change and how we can best position ourselves to function in this new normal, Pakistan included, of course. And so starting with businesses, I think, there are a couple of things that maybe are common sense, but which are worth mentioning anyway, which is, the importance of sanitary issues now. So if businesses want to be taken seriously and want to engage in international value chains, they really need to reflect upon this. It's very common these days. If you go to a business meeting, you expect kind of sanitary gel to be able to sanitize your hands before the meeting. You expect people to be wearing masks. If you're in a supply chain that deals with human food for human consumption or other materials like health materials that's where sanitary issues are particularly important, it has become doubly important to make sure that there are precautions in place to make sure that the recommendations are respected with regards to your sanitary conditions. Then there's all the changes that have happened in terms of transitioning towards a kind of digital world, right? There's been a kind of digital revolution which was already happening, but it has been accelerated by the crisis. And here again, businesses have a lot of work to do to upgrade and to be prepared to engage in this digital world. That means buying hardware, of course, but also software. There are all sorts of different softwares, including Zoom, which was pretty unknown before the crisis and which we've all had to become familiar with very quickly. And this is a real challenge, even in the developed world, you have lots and lots of businesses and workers that are struggling to get familiar with these new apps and these new softwares that are coming out, Microsoft Teams, collaborative working apps, the cloud. And it can be difficult to shift mentalities and get used to working in that way. Although I think, the younger generations that are coming through maybe find it a bit easier. Unfortunately, we've all been forced to adapt very quickly. And we haven't had the luxury of learning over time. Then maybe moving on to the trade support institutions, they have an important role in similar areas in supporting businesses, both to get their sanitary standards up to scratch, but also to make that transition towards a new norm where digital, the status quo, you know, the expected ways of working are all digital today. And so they can support business in those areas, but they also have an important role just to clear the waters, right? And do some research and provide recommendations to businesses about how they should adapt and engage in this new normal in order to promote their export competitiveness. And I just wanted to remind everybody that the topic today really is export competitiveness. So everything I'm saying should be seen in that light, you know. How do we adapt so that we become more competitive in terms of our exports? Then moving on to governments, I think there are a couple of things that we saw that are relevant still today, which was, you know, a kind of instinctive reaction of governments to become more protectionist, and you know, this is an old lesson of economics that you know, if you engage in a tit for tat where you become more protectionist to try and protect your population, actually in the end everybody loses. So we were really pushing for open trade, continued open trade, to ensure that there's you know, goods continue to flow freely across borders, essential supplies continue to flow freely across borders, so that people can continue to have access to the things that they need. And protectionism can only undermine that. And then I wanted to end just by making a point which I think was well made by Dr. Shah, but reiterating it, which is that you know, as we move on from this crisis, people around the world are really rethinking globalization and rethinking the issue of global value chains. A lot of businesses were hit very hard by the fact that their value chains were very fragmented, and that they had all their eggs in one basket, so to speak, with a lot of activities taking place in one specific location, which was not close to the consumers and which was not close to the processing facilities. And so we do see a trend towards the shortening of supply chains, value chains to regional value chains, thinking about nearshoring, it's sometimes called, and also looking at how automation can reduce costs in the destination markets, so that you can actually onshore some manufacturing activities. And this that I think will be difficult to stop. But nevertheless, I still think that, you know, international value chains are here to stay. Right, we're not going to deglobalize from one day to the next. We're just going to shift from one model of globalization to another, and decisions are being taken now. Think about how to position themselves in this new model of globalization that we are seeing. And I think maybe the last message to pass here is that trade facilitation is as important as it ever was. You know, when companies are taking decisions about where to carry out their activities, they will take into consideration the ease of trading across borders. And so I think that's the relevance of the ReMIT project. It's the relevance of ITC, and it's the relevance of Dr. Syed and our team, which is the Trade Facilitation and Policy for Business team. I think the sort of work that we do is as relevant as ever, and perhaps even more relevant now that decisions are being taken about how to restructure value chains and how to change the model of globalization that we've adopted as a global, as an international community. So I'll end there. I hope I haven't taken too much more time than I was supposed to. But I'm available and happy to answer any questions about the comments I've made. And I note some comments about the publication that I mentioned. I'll try and find the link and paste it into the chat as in the next few minutes. So thank you once again for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to hearing the other panelists.
Thank you, Edward, and definitely Edwin, and thank you for bringing a very straight message clearly that trade facilitation remains as important post-COVID and during the recovery from the COVID-19 as it was before the COVID-19. It's a very clear message, and definitely you haven't taken much time, and even if you have taken, it was worth listening. Some very clear points coming out. Adapting to new normal will be critical and is a key for a sustained recovery. And particularly integrating SMEs into that adopting a new normal. That is an opportunity, but at the same time, it poses a key challenges to the economies like Pakistan, where there are structural barriers which needs to be dealt. And I'm sure ReMIT and ICT and other colleagues joining us in discussion will be highlighting these more on these one. But most important point, I think that is much relevant to currently in Pakistan's discussion, that is avoiding the protectionism. Sometime in the name of facilitations, we are confusing facilitation with the protectionism. So I think this is a very clear divide that we have to make, that facilitation does not mean protecting or the protectionism, which will ultimately hurt facilitation. We need to understand facilitation in a broader perspective, in a competitiveness context. That was the key point to me in context of Pakistan's debate coming. Thank you so much for a very enlightening keynote and bringing some, I hope many of our colleagues that have joined us online and our distinguished panelists, those who will be speaking, have taken many good points coming in from your discussion. Once again, thank you also, and thank you also for joining us at very early in the morning, 8 a.m. from the Geneva. We thank you. With this now, we move to the second component of our discussion. We are joined by very distinguished panelists to discuss export competitiveness amid COVID-19 and more related to this in the next 45 minutes or 1 hour. We are joined by Mr. Ehsanullah Shah Sahab. He is Secretary Exports Policy Customs FBR. Mr. Ehsanullah Shah hails from Pakistan's Customs Services. He has been working in the capacity in Customs Services throughout Pakistan. Before joining as Secretary at FBR, he was serving as Additional Collectorate of Customs at Hyderabad. Thank you, sir, joining us. We're also joined by Ms. Rubina Tawfiq Shah, a trade expert and consultant. She is trade policy expert and consultant, having a vast experience and deep insights on the subject of trade and commerce. She promotes, trained and develop entrepreneurs, especially women entrepreneurs, and brings them into mainstream business. And I think this is the right at this moment of time, within COVID context and general context, the biggest service that one can do to the Pakistan, where generally we have a kind of structural exclusions in the gender sense, actually. We are also joined for the panel discussion by Dr. Aadil Nakhoda. He is assistant professor and at IBA Karachi. He is also associated with the Center for Businesses and Economic Research as a research fellow, an expert, have keen interest in international trade, international finance, applied econometrics, and financial economics. We have always been benefiting from his kind of insights on the trade, Pakistan's trade, particularly in kind of the structural issues within the trade sector of the Pakistan. So thank you so much, Dr. Aadil, for joining us from Karachi. We are also joined by the Dr. Shahla Javed Akram. She is founder president at Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry Lahore Division. She's one of the successful women entrepreneur in Pakistan and has more than half a dozen companies to her name. She won as executive member in Lahore Chambers of Commerce and Industries election and open merit in year 2002 and became the first women executive committee member. Her continued struggles led to the National Assembly passing the bill for addition in SROs to allow women chambers at provincial, regional, district level, and thus became the founder president of the Women Chamber of the Commerce and Industry in Pakistan. Thank you, Dr. Shahla, joining us. So let me now kind of invite Mr. Ehsanullah Shah for his take on the export competitiveness in Pakistan amid COVID-19 and any other issues that our distinguished speakers in the keynote and in the opening remarks has highlighted and is. Over to you, sir. Thank you. Sir, can you hear me, please? Ehsanullah Sahab, can you hear me? We can see Ehsanullah Sahab there, but I think there are some problems, maybe in connection. My colleague is just reaching to him on phone. We are just talking on phone to Ehsan Sahab. Just a minute, please. He is most probably muted himself. Ehsan Sahab, can you unmute yourself, please? I think there are some technical problems. So let me bring in next speaker, Ms. Robina Tawfiq. Over to you, Ms. Robina, please. In the meantime, we'll be trying to get back Ehsan, Mr. Ehsan. Thank you.
Haji, Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, please. Thank you.
Achha ji. Thank you very much for inviting me in this seminar today. What I gather is that although I just got the invitation yesterday and I couldn't study very much on it, and I'm a retired government officer. However, I've been engaged in the past 35 years in trade office and also posted abroad. So I have been working on women especially because I feel that this is an area where a lot of work can be done. Right? Trade facilitation and competitiveness. Trade competitiveness means two things. One is quality of product and second is costing, right? These two play a role in being competitive internationally. My view is that these two things are most lacking in women entrepreneurs of Pakistan because they have not been able to come up to the level of exports due to the lack of exposure and due to the assistance by government policies to get into the international trade. So I have been sending reports to government, to USAID, to even ITC I have worked with, and I've made many recommendations. And the first one is to create a database on what are the phases, what are the states of these women, which areas they are working on, and then try and make policies. However, I mean, it's unfortunate that individual efforts are there, but there is no coordinated effort between the government and the private sector and the international organizations. There has to be a coordinated, cooperative effort to develop these women and bring them to the international businesses. Women have exports, very little women come into exports because they do not get the proper information. They do not have the data. They do not have the encouragement even and the support to go into exports. So Pakistan government has been making trade policies on different areas, but it is very unfortunate that all those women who work in these sectors, in which sectors they work in, there are no proper trade policies to encourage these women to come up for exports. For example, if you see these STPFs for the past so many years, I was going through them and teaching them as a resource person of USAID. And we analyzed that all those areas where the incentives have been given, women have very negligible role in them. So who's going to make a policy, a proper coordinated policy for these women to come into exports? Moreover, their costing is very, very strange. These women do not know how to cost their products, how to compete. And the quality, I mean, I wonder if there is any organization, is there any area where they are being trained to manufacture products which are for international trade. They make their products, but they're not internationally recognized. I mean, I would not take them internationally, many of them. Very few of them are tradable. So there has to be a desk, I would say, a proper desk. If ITC is in Pakistan, that's very good that ITC has started taking interest in Pakistan for women especially, because they hold conferences and exhibitions all over the world, which is a ITC sponsored exhibition and conference. But Pakistani participation is not there. I have requested ITC many times, sent an email to them to hold such a conference exhibition in Pakistan, where all the area women, I mean, the women from all over the world come in and coordinate. I mean, if we cannot go to far off countries, at least we can have some kind of coordination among all these South Asian countries or the Asian countries at least, and we can learn from each other. I understand that women of China, women of India, even Bangladesh is much higher than us. Why can't Pakistani women who are much more educated come into proper export businesses and are more export competitive? And maybe somebody has to take charge and have proper information desks and facilitation, especially if that can be done, that will be very good. And now many women are coming into online businesses because there is very little chance of having exposure in the trade exhibitions. So these women, although they have online knowledge, yet the product packaging, the product qualities are not satisfactory in many cases. Yes, some are there, but not very competitive. So, and how do they do business internationally? If they have to, if they get an order for an international product export, how will they go into that? Who is going to facilitate into that? Because many courier services, many packaging companies have also winded up their businesses. Anyway, I mean, it's good that Amazon has come into Pakistan now, and many women are showing interest in that. Yet, I think they need to be trained and how to take advantage of these Amazon services. Ministry of Commerce is doing a very good job for these online businesses. Yet, I think a more inclusive effort should be made, and areas from other cities should be involved in it more, from especially from Balochistan and from KPK, South Punjab. These women are very good in their products and they have the quality, yet they need proper guidance and proper export procedures, knowledge, and facilitation. I would only like to say this. I mean, for other SMEs, Pakistani male SMEs also, the same thing goes. that they need information on how to cater to these post-COVID procedures now. How do they export now? How do they become competitive now? This is an area where I think all these organizations who are busy in promoting and helping Pakistani businesses should come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rubina, for bringing a perspective, a long experience perspective, particularly focused on the gender side. And very rightly said, I think, that gender, even in current policies, remains as a residual. I mean, whenever there is a gender side, there is a gender discussion and policies, we also feel sometimes that it is coming as a residual, not at the center stage of policy making. And thank you for advocating kind of the desk, setting a desk for kind of the women-led SMEs. But I think going one step ahead, even what we have been talking at SDPI is that we need to not only in the trade policy or SMEs policies, at a broader policy making, we need to move towards now gender in all and all in gender kind of context where all the policies do not take a gender lens as a residual. It should be at the center stage of policy making. Thank you so much for kind of reiterating and strengthening this voice on bringing in the gender perspective at the center stage of the policy makings, including trade policy and other policies. And let me also apologize that we are still trying to connect Mr. Ehsan. He is having some connection problems, and this is where Dr. Tauqir Shah's point that Pakistan need a good bandwidth, a good internet coverage, not only in the remote areas. We feel these problems sitting in the center in Islamabad. Actually, we are trying to continue to connect to Ehsan Saab, and we'll bring him back the moment he connects. In the meantime, let me take the discussion now to Dr. Aadil. Dr. Aadil has been recently engaged. I have been following some of the work on the trade, particularly with the COVID context. So I'm sure he will be sharing some thoughts from his work and the picking up on the thoughts, gender and other issues that are arising from so far. In context, what are 2 to 3 key elements that he thinks should be as a policy agenda to improve economic and the export competitiveness of particularly SMEs and with the gender focus as well. Over to you, Dr. Aadil.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sajid, for the introduction. So before I begin, I would like to thank SDPI and the partners for the invitation to this webinar. Okay, so let me start with this. So one of the biggest challenges imposed by the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic is a disruption to global supply chains and international trading activities. Now, although several countries imposed stringent lockdowns that curtailed business and industrial activities within their borders for an extended period of time, the lockdown that disrupted industrial activities in Pakistan was for a relatively shorter period. The domestic economic activity, as gauged by the larger scale manufacturing index, observed high growth levels during the recovery stage starting late 2020. Several incentives were provided to various sectors in order to boost their output. However, the challenges faced by firms participating in international trading activities can be much more complex as they involve trading networks spread across different countries. Here, it is important to mention that Pakistan observed an upward trend in its exports from October 2020 onwards. Exports continued to increase year on year, reporting the highest level in the past fiscal year. The inflows from remittances and from service exports have also been reported to reach record-breaking levels. However, as the economic growth levels increase, it is likely that the current account deficit will too increase as the growth of imports outpaces that of exports, particularly as GDP growth and import growth tend to be positively correlated. This is why improving export competitiveness should become the topmost priority for the policymakers in order to ensure that the current account deficit is reined through higher exports rather than by curtailing imports through policies that would instead reduce economic growth. So the Sustainable Development Policy Institute's report on supporting export competitiveness amid COVID-19 in Pakistan is an exceptional study that focuses on the challenges faced by domestic firms when participating. It's an exceptional study that focuses on the challenges faced by domestic firms when participating in international trading activities during a period when they were bombarded with trade frictions and disruptions to their supply chain due to the pandemic. The report does find losses to productivity levels of firms and significant trade costs associated with logistics, as well as increased costs due to compliance with stricter COVID-19 related measures. Temporary trade measures were introduced. Some were trade enhancing, while others were trade restrictive to alleviate the adverse impact of the pandemic. More interestingly, the use of digital communication channels became common for firms as they struggled to survive with closures to physical marketplaces. However, some entrepreneurs face significant challenges in adapting to the new normal, which involve greater digitalization of their business practices. Overall, the learning of new market skills, use of social media presence, and special deals to consumers became exceptionally important for firms. So now let me list some of the major findings from this report relevant to our discussion. Trade costs have increased for both exporters and importers. Although the survey itself was conducted last year, this is likely to have greater implications for traders, as not only has the rupee depreciated in recent months, the cost of maritime activities has skyrocketed. Some estimates suggest that shipping costs between major ports in China and its trading partners have increased multiple-fold as the number of ships operating decreased during the pandemic. This can have severe implications on the global supply chains, further limiting participation of Pakistani firms in global value chains for goods that cross the borders multiple times. Exporters are likely to find more stringent trade measures, particularly in the agro-based industry, as the spread of the pandemic induced panic amongst the traders. Under such circumstances, there's a need to introduce measures to facilitate trade, such as electronic filing of documents and ensuring that more trading partners harmonize the standards in order to reduce trade frictions. The biggest challenge for Pakistani exporters is the lack of information on various measures introduced by the government and the governments and their trading partners that can limit the expansion of trading activities of smaller exporters. Now, with digital communications becoming more prominent, it provides an opportunity for firms to reach out to suppliers and customers across borders. However, it can also sufficiently increase the cost for firms that need to resynchronize their physical platforms towards virtual platforms. The costs can be high for smaller firms that are often unable to adapt to newer technologies and learn the new skills necessary. The most important point from this study, I believe, is that certain firms were dynamic in the sense that they were not only able to expand their range of products as the world faced a crisis, but were also able to increase their export revenue from the current portfolio of goods. The crisis allowed them to diversify into production and exports of personal protection equipment. It is imperative that such firms are studied more extensively in order to learn about the best practices that helps firms adapt to these challenges. However, it is also important to note that the several larger firms were better able to adapt than the smaller firms on the basis of their lobbying power. Larger firms were able to negotiate the use of e-documentation during the pandemic. On the other hand, the smaller firms struggled with access to government provisions and access to finance, which may have prevented them from various government incentives offered by the State Bank of Pakistan and the federal government. Now, although Pakistan did report an increase in its exports and imports in late 2020, structural challenges do remain and must be addressed. Pakistan's exports are heavily concentrated in three main products, namely textile, leather, and cereals. Textile contributes to about 60% of the total exports, and the most successful exporters tend to enjoy government incentives and subsidies. The sector involves major lobbies that push for government intervention in order to boost export sales. On the other hand, the less traditional products in Pakistan are often neglected. This is reflected in the lack of export diversification that Pakistan faces. Now, let me list some of the major issues in trade policy that has limited our export growth and global integration. So the first one is free trade agreements are an important tool to ensure that trading partners are not only have access to markets with great potential, but can also provide the firms an opportunity to tap into different markets that can provide them inputs cheaply. The access to foreign inputs that can be cheaply converted into exportable output has been a major propellant for export growth in Vietnam. With the signing of the FTA with China, Pakistani producers were able to procure cheaper intermediate goods at lower duty rates from the largest manufacturing hub in the world. In other words, Pakistani producers have easier access to inputs that are demanded by competing markets. On the other hand, the GSP Plus status offered by the EU has resulted in an increase in textile exports from Pakistan. However, it has failed to diversify its export base as a result of these concessions. The other industries may not only lack capabilities, but may lack access to inputs that can improve their efficiency. FTAs can encourage Pakistani firms to participate in GVCs and can increase presence of Pakistani goods in foreign markets. However, this requires significant improvement in the capabilities of the firms. Now, the second point, in order to boost domestic production, the government tends to reduce tariffs on imports of raw materials and intermediate goods while imposing higher rates on the imports of consumer goods. The cascading tariffs create an anti-export bias as it provides manufacturers. Currency was kept overvalued in mid-2010s. It increased this anti-export bias as the overvalued currency reduced export competitiveness. Further, the protective environment also discourages innovation and competition as it allows firms to maintain high margins without the pressures from foreign competition that would otherwise compel firms to innovate and churn new products to remain competitive. The third point is that it is significantly important to improve the capabilities of firms that participate in international trading activities, particularly the SMEs. This should involve not only better facilitation in terms of improving market access, but also improving access to finance and ensuring that government provisions, if any, are provided, are distributed more equitably across firms. Larger firms are unlikely to innovate when they can access government subsidies to fund their exporting activities. Smaller firms typically require a conducive business environment that enables their participation in international trading activities and increase export sales. In essence, it is important to study several different aspects of the business environment that enables firms to participate in international trade. I believe the report by SDPI provides an excellent coverage to the challenges faced by firms in improving their export competitiveness during the pandemic. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aadil, for bringing us assessment of kind of the trade policy of Pakistan and giving some very clear recommendations on how to improve export competitiveness and with the key focus on SMEs particularly. One point that is continuously arising from so far all the speakers, that is the availability of information. One of the study that SDPI has done also, it shows that the most effective measure that SMEs think it has been to kind of combat the COVID-19 or recovery from COVID was the information or the awareness. And I think this is where the data comes. A very important database becomes very central and important for any evidence-based policy making. And particularly this challenge remains when there is a higher or the overwhelmingly large proportion of informal sector SMEs. So thank you so much again for putting up awareness and availability of information from all the speakers. Thank you so much. I'm just told that Mr. Ehsan has joined us back, but he is dropped again. So let me bring in now Dr. Shahla Javed Akram. Over to you, Dr. Shahla. Thank you.
Dr. Shahla left some messages in the chat box. She had a meeting with the president, so she had to leave.
Okay, thank you. So in the meantime, let me, while we wait for Mr. Ehsanullah to join us, let me go back to Dr. Tauqir Shah and Mr. Edwin, if they have any thoughts or the comments on the discussion so far that they would like to pick up before we invite closing remarks, or luckily if we are joined by Mr. Ehsan. Thank you. So over to you, Dr. Tauqir, if you have any thoughts on the discussion going so far.
Thank you, Doctor. Considering a large presence of participants and an overwhelming interest in COVID-19 and trade competitiveness, I would like to share that WTO is holding its annual public forum from 28th September to 1st of October this year. And this year's focus theme is Trade Beyond COVID-19, Building Resilience. So I would encourage all experts who are interested in exploring this subject further. There are going to be more than 100 sessions, all focusing on some aspect of trade and COVID, and leading experts and think tanks from the Geneva Trade Circuit would be participating. So this is a good opportunity to sort of get a much broader and global view of the issue. Secondly, I would request Edwin to maybe share some thoughts on what their executive director recently said about the strategy of green recovery from the COVID, because this becomes very important in the backdrop of the COP coming up in Scotland, and the two issues are slightly synchronized. So, Edwin, any thoughts on what's ITC's take on this green recovery approach to pandemic? Thank you.
Great. No, thank you. Thank you both, and thanks to the previous speakers for some very interesting comments and remarks. You know, in 10 minutes, it's not possible to cover everything related to this topic, which is a huge topic that's touching on all aspects of our lives since the end of 2019. So I would like to you know, respond to the question about the green recovery, but before that, I just wanted to make a couple of points which maybe were a little bit missed out in the first in the first few minutes when I spoke. So the first one is to do with the informal actors, which I think was mentioned a couple of times, and which I think is a very important issue that isn't brought up frequently enough, including by myself in the first intervention that I made. We've been doing a lot of work on informal actors, informal businesses, and informal cross-border traders around the world, and what we see is that these actors are actually much more numerous than we might realize. They are most of them, I would say, are not in fact engaging in any inherently illicit activities. They're in fact just trying to make a living, and the reason they are informal is usually because they either don't have the awareness or the knowledge to formalize, or because they can't afford to do so. The burden in terms of transaction costs and also taxes and fees and so on is just too heavy for them, and so they remain in the informal sector. And with regards to COVID-19, what we've also seen is that these actors from the informal economy were the hardest hit. They were the hardest hit because due to their informal status, they were not eligible for any support whatsoever in most cases, with very few exceptions, and also when it came to crossing borders, whereas you know, formal businesses and formal actors were able to comply with regulatory activities, informal actors are by definition already not compliant with the system, and so when borders were shut down, those you know, for sanitary reasons, those actors found their activities particularly hard hit. We also know that in the developing world, the majority of informal businesses and informal MSMEs are owned by women, and women tend to be more numerous in the informal economy. And that brings me to a second point I wanted to make, which was just to agree with the previous speakers, Ms. Rubina Tawfiq, especially about the importance of gender mainstreaming and just paying attention to what are the specific impacts on women of some of these developments that we've been seeing. Now to come to Dr. Shah, your question about the green recovery. I think it's a good one, and one that I wanted to mention, and I perhaps forgot to in my speech, because you know, a lot of people, businesses, governments, institutions are taking the COVID pandemic as a good opportunity to reset. It's sometimes called the Great Reset, right? And to correct or adjust the economic models that we've been pursuing so far and replace them with ones that are more conducive to a sustainable future. And trade is no exception to this. I think if you look around the world, you will see an acceleration of different measures that are being taken to try and ensure that the new trading environment is sustainable and green. And I can cite, for example, some of the proposals that have been coming out for carbon border adjustment measures, that's being considered by the European Union, by the United States. We can also cite things like mandatory due diligence, environmental and human rights due diligence requirements that are being introduced. And these are unilateral measures that are being taken by some of the largest economies and markets in the world, importing markets, and they will create new requirements for exporters. And this is not being done within the framework of the WTO. Like I said, it's being done unilaterally, and it's highly contested. But the reality is that with the COVID-19 pandemic, it was kind of a stimulus for people to start really thinking about what are the transformative measures that can be taken to ensure a green recovery. And so, we don't have all the answers, but what I would do is I would certainly encourage all of you to give some thoughts to this and contribute to the discussion. So within the framework of the WTO, for example, it's essential that these issues around green recovery, sustainability, that we start to make more progress on those issues, and that developing countries like Pakistan make their voice heard in order to find solutions that are multilateral and that have the buy-in of all of the international community, rather than let's say measures that are taken unilaterally and that create winners and losers, and perhaps lead to something that could be called a trade war. Because, like I said earlier, protectionism isn't going to help anybody, least of all the environment. For environmental sustainability, we also need free trade in green technologies, and so on. So that's what I would say on that topic. I hope I've been able to answer the question. It's been a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin, for highlighting two very important and very interlinked point. I think in terms of green recovery, one of the key challenge will be preparing informal SMEs for the green practices and the green businesses. That will be very central to green recovery at a ground level, at a micro level. Thank you so very much for highlighting. So we are still not joined by, there is a peekaboo going between us and Mr. Ikram, Mr. Ehsanullah. So let me if we can have some questions, one or two questions from the audience before we invite the closing remarks. If there are any pressing questions, please, you can type in the chat question answer box, in the chat box. So I cannot still see any questions. So are we allowing them to speak on mic? Can you please type your questions if you have the questions from the audience, if they do have any questions. Otherwise, I'll go to our closing remarks. So we have one raised hand, but please type in the chat box. Please type in the chat box your question and I'll read that question. Mia Zafar Iqbal Sahab have a question, but can you please type in the chat box or the question answer session we have there. So please type your question here, Mia Zafar Iqbal Sahab. I can see your yes. If you can type an answer question, please. In the meantime, may I request our distinguished panelists to just open their mic and one bullet that what they think is the key policy recommendation or the proposal to improve export competitiveness SMEs, just one bullet. So you just open your mic, give your bullet that this is to me the central policy reform that is need to improve the SMEs competitiveness. In the meantime, I wait for the question. So Ms. Robina Tawfiq, just one bullet if you have any recommendation, key particular bullet recommendation that this is necessary to improve the export competitiveness.
I would recommend that a database center should be established, database of SMEs. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Aadil?
It's okay. So yes, the government should work more on facilitation rather than direct interventions. So that's my thing, facilitation through improvement in communication channels, etc.
And what is one key step that you think should be taken to improve facilitation? Specific, if you have something in mind.
Well, facilitation improves. So you have these, so there are these national trade repositories and portals and all that. That must be treated in priority, that have all the information that an exporter and importer needs at one place.
So this comes to database again. Thank you so much. So let me now read a question from me as Zafar Iqbal. What measures has been taken in Pakistan for a green recovery? So any of you would like to respond on this one? A very quick 1 minute intervention if any of our speakers would like to have on this one. Otherwise I can go forward on it, responding to it. Dr. Tauqir Shah sir, would you like to add any point on this one?
You see, Pakistan is signatories of the Paris Declaration, and we have very comprehensive nationally determined commitments, which are in a way major priority of the present government. And these nationally determined commitments in a way are all designed towards green products, environment-friendly processes, and green recovery. So the present government's leading initiative on renewables, on using forestry as an enterprise, I think will add toward this. And secondly, Dr. Nakhoda mentioned the GSP Plus. The good news is that it has been extended for the next 2 years. And GSP looks at our commitment and our evidence of performance on all 27 conventions, and which primarily includes, apart from human rights, labor, gender, and good governance indicators, the environmental conventions also. So as was mentioned, that for competitiveness, cost and quality is important. I think in the times to come, the process through which and the environment in which the products are made will be more important than cost and the quality. And this, I say in the context of GSP Plus, which is our almost 25% of the exports. So we would be looked at more minutely and through lens of climate change, social, labor, human rights, and other governance related compliances. So I think that will be a real test of our competitiveness, that do we fare well on this. You mentioned about one liner, one commitment. In my view, future is digital. And if SMEs of Pakistan are to become global players, government will have to enable them with digital tools, help them in onboarding. The national policy on e-commerce promises a lot. There is good work going on. There's a regular sort of monitoring of that, implementation of that policy, but it's a very long way. So I think we had to equip our SMEs, and especially women-owned and managed SMEs, with digital tools. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. A very important point on digitization. And I think digital literacy and digital infrastructure will be a key for recovery. So what we are trying is, before I invite the final remarks, I'm just told that
Mr. Ehsan is online.
Yeah,
if
yeah.
You can,
Exactly. He has joined us. I was just telling this. I'm told that he has joined us back. Over to you, Ehsanullah Shah Sahab, after a long wait. Can you please, can you hear us, please? I think there remain some issues on technical side. What we can do is that we may have an audio message or video message from hand. We can upload it on the website for our audience and the attendees, those who have joined. But we'll still wait one more minute if he can join and if he can speak, please. Because it is always the central to listen to the government, actually, what has been happening there. In the meantime, if just 1 minute, if anyone can respond to our Maliha Akmal's question, is there any place in Lahore where international standard product development is taking place at private or government sector? Just a quick bullet answer if anyone can have. This question from Maliha Akmal Khan. The broader point is that the quality products, that is there any sector or any where there is a quality product being produced? Okay, let me now invite our final closing remarks from Dr. Muhammad Saeed. He is Senior Advisor, Trade Facilitation, International Trade Center. Over to you, sir, for your closing remarks, please.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are, please.
I think I cannot switch on my video. I don't know why, but let me speak. Let me start thanking SDPI, all the organizers. Oh, now it looks that I'm visible and audible also.
Yes, we can have picture and voice both. Please go ahead.
And Dr. Sajid, thank you for this kind invitation. For a person like me, witnessed such a rich debate and interventions from all the experts. One, I feel capacity constraint, as well as I think it would be unfair on my part to probably try to summarize what has been said. But as a participant, let me share my take after listening to all these experts. Of course, all my thanks goes to all these experts and the participants for taking out time, and my team headed by Dr. Tauqir in Pakistan and SDPI for their ever forthcoming institutional support for our activities and our mission to help Pakistani businesses and for them through the government. This COVID, which was a health crisis and soon led to, on account of the, as was mentioned, disruption of the supply and the demand side, became an economic crisis. And the governments were faced with the, I would say, a challenge of lives and the livelihood, not only to balance them, but to treat the path in an equilibrium manner so that these are constantly balanced, the health and the life issues, as well as the livelihood and the business issues. What came out very clearly, the first point, which my takeaway is that trade policy is a part of the solution. So we should not be looking at in the context of being introvert or the protectionist. Rather, we should be taking this as an opportunity rather than a crisis or a threat to reset ourselves, to adjust to the realities of the world which are changing if we need to be the important players in this international and global arena. The second and equally important part is that this crisis and the responses globally as well as from the Pakistan has also further I would say, accentuated or made it visible that trade facilitation is ever more important, whether it is access to the vaccines, or whether it is access to the PPE, or whether it is access to your production processes, imports or export. It's equally important, and we should invest into that. The third takeaway from this discussion is that this trade policy alone might not be the sufficient or the complete response. So we need that this trade policy has to be aligned with the industrial policy, has to be aligned with the your fiscal policy, your monetary policy, your investment incentives. So all those kind of things we need to do. So there is a dire need, especially in the context of the COVID, for policy coherence by the different actors of the government. And one of the key amongst that, which runs across all these policies, is the digital response. So whether it needs to be the digital infrastructure, as was mentioned, and we experienced this also, or the softwares or the hardwares, or the mindset to approach the issues from the digital angle, from the solution perspectives as well as from the response perspective. So that has to be a key policy consideration, as well as the key consideration for regulatory compliance and helping our exporters and importers. Equally important is that this policy response has to be inclusive. And when I say inclusive, the most important aspect is that it should not be seen as a gender neutral, but it should be gender responsive. Rather, if it could be gender focused to a great extent, to bring that segment of the society as part of our policy response, or our business has contributed to the economy, has to be a key priority focus area to address that. I don't know how sensitive it would be to say in the Pakistani context, but there's a phrase. I would say the competitiveness, especially of a country, is too important to be left to the governments only. It has to be a joint response, and where the government takes the main responsibility. Equally important is that we should be also investing for the promotion of these business activities, for the hand-holding, and that role can be played more by the trade support institution, whether it is TDAP, whether it is Board of Investment, or whether it is the chambers or the different sectoral associations. So this response has to be a comprehensive response covering everybody who ever can do that. Maybe there is some change from focus might shift from the global economy to global value chain to the regional value chain. There would be additional requirements from your destination markets about the environments, about the green things. The carbon taxes was one of the issues which was mentioned, but it has to be a response from the businesses themselves, from the business support institutions, and from the government. So we should be seeing the things which came out from the experts comment in that way. So I'll stop here, except to thank the organizer, the SDPI, the ReMIT team, as well as all the participants and our experts who I would say contributed to such a rich debate. Thank you very much, Dr. Sajid. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very key message coming out finally, that the export competitiveness cannot be left only on the government. Private sector and other stakeholders have a great role to play. Thank you so much for bringing it at the end, but at a very, kind of summarizing the discussion that we have been doing. Before I say a formal thanks and bye-bye, I would request all of our panelists to please open your cams our social media team would like to have a sense of in-person presence, taking a picture, please. If all of you can, please open your cams. Dr. Aadil, can you open your cam, please? Thank you. Social media team, let me know when you are done taking the picture. Ahad, we cannot see you on the screen. So let me know our social team is done when with the picture. Abdullah, are we done? We're done, sir. Thank you. If you have a poor bandwidth, you can close your cam. Otherwise, you can continue. I thank all of you, and I have one apology to run. That is from Ehsanullah Shah Sahab. He has tried almost here remain engaged throughout 1 hour, 90 minutes, I mean, overall, with us trying to connect. This really shows kind of his passion to participate. But unfortunately, some technical issues didn't allow him to participate, but we will try to get a message, video or audio, both from him and will be uploading on the website. I know. I finally thank all of you on behalf of ITC, UK Aid and SDPI for joining us, remaining with us and sharing your thoughts. And also to our attendees, thank you so much for joining us. And we can, I mean, share that you can send your questions on email if you have your thoughts on emails. I'm typing my email here. You can put any questions that you think are very important and but were not covered. Here is the email. Any of you can please put these questions and we will try to come up with the answers or the responses. I once again thank you, all of you, for bringing such a good discussion, keeping the timelines. That is most important when it comes to Pakistan particularly, and online speaking. Thank you so very much for all of you. Have a good day. A very good afternoon to all of you.